Hello, everyone. This is FIDE Master Victor Nustroev, and thank you for joining our workshop today. Today, we are going to talk about how to play rook end games when we have a passed pawn on the other side of the board. So 3 versus 3 on the king side and 1 passed pawn on the other side of the board. Fine. So we are waiting for more people to join. We're about to start soon. However, it seems like today I see some new faces. Well, guys, can you please introduce yourself a little? Which country you are from and what's your rating? It can be either online rating, for example, chess.com, or FIDE or USCF or any national rating. As for me, well, I'm sure that most of you already know that I'm a feeder master. Currently, my rating is 2283. I decreased it a little, but very little. So I'm going to improve it. Maybe this year in June, I'm going to participate in the tournament here in Argentina. Well, I'm originally from Russia, but for several years, I've been living in Argentina. Please also let me know whether the sound and video quality is good. I think it is. What else I would like to share? So usually we have 2 more events where we can meet. These are Title Tuesday that I'm playing on. This is a tournament for title players, and I'm participating there every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. It should be 4 p.m. It should be 4 p.m. Central European Time. So I'm streaming it on Twitch, so you can watch these games. I always share the analysis. After the game, I do the analysis. So if you are interested, especially in the openings that I play, you should join. And if you're looking of how to improve your ability to play Blitz, then yes, it does make sense for you to watch these streams. Because well, I'm not a good Blitz player, but I'm improving a lot while playing regularly and while studying and analyzing these games after I finish them. What else? On Thursdays um, we play a rapid arena in our club on chess.com. It's Chesslands Club. Let me share. So this is my profile on chess.com. You can send me a friend request. And this is our profile this is our club at Chesslands. And in this club, we do organize rapid arenas. For example, where was the last one? No, there was a, yeah, I'll send you the link to join if you want. And then I will share where we conduct tournaments there. So this is the link if you are interested, if you didn't join yet. And the tournaments. So club events, how can I find it? These are current tournaments, but I want to look at the past ones, past events. Not these ones. Okay, not here. Um, coming. Completed live tournaments. Yeah, this is what we need. And now all rapid. No, it's not here. So it should be inside our club. Unfortunately, I don't know how to find it. So what I wanted to say, so every week we are doing an arena tournament, which where we choose the opening to play. Mhm. It's somewhere inside the club. Last time I managed to find this tournament. Don't remember how. But well, last we did two tournaments. One was devoted to Can Sicilian, where we played Can Sicilian opening for white and black, and the next one was devoted to Benka Gambit. Maybe here are club events. No. Mm. Oh, I know how to find it. I'll share it. So because I played there, so so let me click on this game, and then it shows the tournament. Bianca Gambit Repeat Arenas. So yes, this is. So actually there were only 10 players this time. Well, probably the opening is not popular. That's the reason. So on Thursday, I'm going to conduct another rapid tournament devoted to a different opening. Which opening do you want me to work on? Do you want me to create the tournament so you can practice it? I'm debating between Rui Lopez or maybe some French defense lines. I'm going to do the one devoted to Italian game, but later, because I'm currently working on the course. Maybe actually it does make sense to conduct Giuco Piano event. Yeah, actually, it's interesting because I can implement the ideas that I've already learned. So I'm playing myself, and some other strong chess players participate in such a tournament too. So if you would like to practice, I kindly recommend. Fine. Mm, that's all. That's all for today. I mean, regarding our news, regarding our events, so let's practice Rook End games. Okay, as for new students attending our workshop today, there is Peter Bazzioni from the United States, from Las Vegas, and his rating is 1850. Very good, Peter. Oh, actually, Queen's Gambit. Yeah, Queen's Gambit is extractive. We can try it. Rui Lopez. Okay. Well, I'm not a big fan of Rui Lopez. However, I've played it when I was young. Um Nowadays, I would prefer to play Italian game more, or more than Rui Lopez. Why? Oh, oops. Here we are. Why? Well, I don't have a specific answer, but it seems to me that having the bishop on c4 is more natural rather than developing to b5. Maybe, well, c3 d4 is also a natural, but you also do c3 d4 when you play Rui Lopez. What can I say? That these openings are quite similar. Okay, yeah. So Kasparov became fond of the Scotch. Yes, Kasparov really enjoyed Scotch game, and he, well, created some investigations there. I remember when he returned, he was playing a Blitz tournament in St. Louis. I don't know why. Probably he was asked by his friend, the organizer of such event. But he did play Blitz. He didn't perform very well, but he was doing mainly okay. And he was playing Scotch. In every game with white pieces, he was playing Scotch. Sometimes he performed well, sometimes not. But it's because he's retired. So you cannot play like top 10 grandmasters if you are not seriously playing chess for the last 20 years. Okay, what are we going to talk about? We are going to talk about rook end games, and actually, rook end games is a very important component of any of a chess game because rook end games happen so often. So why? Because the rooks are likely to stay alive because they join the place of action as last pieces usually, and that's why they are exchanged at the very last moment. So that's why improving your ability to play rook in games will improve your performance as well. There are a lot of positions that you can get with rook in games, but what you definitely should know is how to win when you have 3 versus 3 on one side and one outside passed pawn. What can I say? So this, well, this pawn should be further from the other side of the board, which provides you with more winning chances. So ideally, you have more chances to win if you have the A pawn. Few less chances when you have the B pass pawn, and just a few chances when there is a pawn on the C file. If there isn't the pawn on the D file, you're unlikely um, to win at all. Why so? Well, of course, a lot depends on the pawn structure on the king side, the positions of the kings, the position of the rooks, but ideally, you'd better prefer having the pawn which is further from the other side of the board. Why so? The reason is that you use this pawn as a traction for the enemy king, and sooner or later, you're likely to exchange this pawn for one of the pawns on the king side. But the key idea is to distract the enemy king from his king side to the other side of the board, exchange this for that, but have your king somewhere close to the king side to capture the rest of the pawns or to support your passed pawns on that side of the board, on the king side, I mean. So that's why if the pawn is on the B file, it's easier for the enemy king to enter his camp back once he captures the pawn. When it's on the A file, it's a bit complicated. It's one extra temper that should be spent on it. So that's why you have more chances with the A pawn. With the B, it's still fine. With the C, it's complicated. With the D, almost you don't have any chances to win. What else? The rook should be located behind the passed pawn. If it is possible, most likely you win. However, again, it doesn't guarantee a win, but you have a very good chances to play for a win. If the enemy rook is behind, then you almost have no chances to win. And if your opponent win, if there is an endgame rooks, because even without a pawn, it's still possible to draw the game. For example, on a2 from which the pawn from promotion as can potentially attack the king and deliver checks from behind in case if the king decides to go to that side. So, for example, this, fine. What else? You should locate the pawns on that side so they can protect each other. So this is the best location. Why? Why so? Why not, for example, like that? Like this, because even if your king is on the 3, you can protect the pawns. So on the one hand, you are close to the king side. Well, you are protecting the pawns on the king side. On the other hand, you're very close to the queen side. If you locate like that, you are likely to lose your h2 pawn. With your king on the 3, you 100% already lose the h pawn. So that's why having the king there to be able to play um, on both sides of the board. Okay, so let's now analyze. Well, definitely it's a5 and then the rook should be located from behind. It was Alexander Alekin playing against Jezero Capablanca. Some of you may see this very representative example. For example, if you have joined our group lessons, you've seen it. So, well, rook a4, definitely rook a4, 100% rook a4. But Alexander Alekin decided to play rook d5, then they repeated the position, and finally the rook comes to a4. So, well, the rook is well placed. You protect the pass pawn from behind. Who can tell me what's the winning plan for white in this position? Yeah, so get the king to b5, somewhere from which you can chase the rook away and advance the pawn. So if you can bring the king to the queen side and attack the rook, that will be perfect. So king f6, king f3, king f5, king e3, h5. So he wants to keep a position as well as locate his pawns perfectly. King d3, king d5, king c3, king c5. How to play? Looks like we cannot progress and we cannot bring our king to b5. What would you suggest? King d3? Well, okay, king d3, king b5. What then? King b4. Well, your rook is hanging. So first of all, let's save the rook. In this position, it's time to play king d4 or something like that. But again, Alexander Alekin decided to play this move. Why so? Well, I don't know what he was. Maybe he didn't know how to win and he was just experimenting. Who knows? Because the game was played in the beginning of the 20th century, and well, there were rules of how to play such end games, but maybe no exact knowledge of how to win when you have a passed pawn. So that's why they had to create a strategy themselves. That's why actually this exact game is nowadays in all books, all chess manuals devoted to rook and games. So uh, yeah, they were pioneering such in games. So pioneering, yeah. So king c5 was played. Well, why not to take on e5? Good question, but I think the answer is obvious because it's an easy win. So the king is too close. So you may say that, well, he protected, so we should be fine. Actually, no, it's not. It's not. It's definitely not fine. What's wrong with this? Who can tell me what's the winning plan here? No, it's not Zugzwang fully. Because black can move, they can move here or there, back to e8, and from all these three positions, they are defending the pawn on f7. John thinks it's f3 and g4. Okay, let's say f3, king f8, g4. They take on g4, you take, and let's say they play this move. How do you progress? h5? Fine, but it's a draw because they let you playing with the h pawn and you cannot promote it. The king is stuck to the f pawn. That's right. Here, for example, on e8. But how do we win? Well, f3, g4 doesn't make sense. Maybe you can play f3, but not with the idea of playing g4. Yes, now John is absolutely correct. It's f4, f5. f5. Why so? Because you either win the pawn on g6, and then you pawn up, and you also can capture on h5 then. Or if they take, then you take this pawn first, and then you take the h pawn. So you're a pawn up anyway. So maybe this, and then it's over. King f7. How to play? King h6. Yeah, king h6 should be fine. The next move is king g6. If f5, it's king g5. So for example, king e7, king g6, king e6, and you promote much faster than they can capture on g3, for example. So that's the plan. So that's why exchanging the rooks on a5 isn't a good strategy, because the white king is faster and f4, f5 wins. That's why king c5. So maybe Ali King was just testing his opponent. King c5, king c3, king b5 back, king goes to d4. What then? Well, again, capturing is a mistake. What actually is going on here? Let me explain. We first tried to move our king to b5, but of course, this strategy is unsuccessful if black plays properly. If they can shoulder our king, then we cannot invade the enemy camp on the queen side. If so, then we should activate our king and invade the enemy territory on the other side of the board. Because in such a case, once they capture on f7 and our king is, let's say, I don't know, here, here, or here, we can capture the enemy pawns. So that's why his second strategy is to move the king to the queen, to the king side then. Check, king f5. Check, he goes that way. Well, black decided to build a kind of a fortress with the king on a6, blocking the pawn. And the rook preventing the enemy king from invasion. But this invasion, this invasion will happen anyway. King g5, check, king h6, and rook f5. So how to win? Uh, if if black doesn't have to move, then they just can hold the position like it is and simply draw the game. But actually, white sees that black runs out of move. How? Well, they have rook f6, they have rook f3, and rook f5. Every king move means that we advance the pawn. So, for example, moving the king. No, let me just play a certain move. Moving the king back means that we still do that, and the king again has to move, and then this, and we finally promote. So they don't have moves with the king. They only have moves with this rook, which can move to f3 or f6. That's why f4. So we limit their rook activity. For example, rook f6 would fail. How? King g7, if they don't want to lose a pawn, rook f5, and then just, let's say, rook a3. And they have no rook moves. Any rook move now leads to a loss of the f7 pawn. That's why rook c5. The f pawn is not hanging, so that's why there is no rush. But rook a3, defending the pawn on g3. Rook c7, king g7. So the f-pawn movement with a discovery check means a loss of the g6 pawn. That's why what they have to do is just to keep the rook on the d file. Rook d7. Let's decide how to play. White is definitely winning, but if we just keep moving the rook or just keep moving the king, we are unlikely to win the game. So actually, we cannot play this move because with f6 or f5, they leave our king cut off, which doesn't favor us. So if we want to move the king, we can use only these squares and all these. Rook a3, then f3, g4. It's probably related to the previous, to one of the previous positions. No, I don't think it works. By the way, guys, if you watch this event on YouTube, can you please like this video? This is how we are likely to get more viewers and more people will learn how to play Rook in games. Actually, nowadays, I think that chess players are quite lazy. They want to play, but they don't want to learn. However, how is it possible to win the games if you don't know something? Okay, rook f3. Yeah, rook f3 is a good move with the idea of playing f5. But the point is that once you move the rook away, you lose the a5 pawn automatically. And then it's possible. I still think it's possible to play like that. But why not to start with f5, like Dan suggested, for example, here? Oh, I just realized that there is a dog in my room, so he's watching how we went to. Well, you can see him behind. Okay. So, okay, fine. So let's continue. G takes f5. Otherwise, they lose this pawn uh, on g6 because, well, doing something like that is a mistake. Why so? Well, because of several reasons. So first of all, we can push f6, and this becomes a far advanced pawn. And once we take this, we have two pass pawns, and then we definitely promote because the rook cannot stop the f pawn if it's supported by the king. So what they can do is defend f7. But this time, it leads to a disaster anyway. Simply rook e3, rook e7. So that's why g takes f5. Rook f3 is possible and can be played, no doubts, but there is a more simple way, king h6. King h6, f4. Well, this pawn is lost, and that's why they decide to sacrifice it in order to ruin our pawn structure. Because if we capture then and they continue with f4, we can simply react with g4 and keep two pawns connected, which increases our chances to win. So that's why f4 right now. Well, what else they can do instead of f4? Can they play, let's say, rook d5, for example? No, they cannot, because even if they play so, we still win with any move, with this move. f4, fine, I don't care. They take here, let's take it. They take on a7, they take on a7 with a rook. If they take on a5, I mean, with the king, then it's rook g5. And we simply win. How? Well, for example, if the rooks are exchanged, we take on f7 first, and then we can advance the h pawn successfully. If they don't take, then we take. And this is completely winning because king g7 and rook g5, king g7, and the h pawn is promoted. There is nothing they can do to stop it. Fine. So the game continued with f4, g takes f4, and rook d5. Now, at least they save the pawn on h5. King g7, rook f5. Again, seems like everything is protected. But rook a4, and it's a Zugzwang. The king has to move this time because the rook move means f7 is lost. And if f7 is lost, there is one more extra pawn for white. Rook a5. You mean rook a5 in this position? No, it's too late. f7 is lost, the f is promoted. So rook f5 was played and rook a4. So if the king... you mean in this position rook a5, but it's lost anyway. The f7 is lost. Maybe there was a chance to play such a move earlier. In this position, no. Okay, king b5, because a6 this time blunders the rook. When I was showing a situation where the rook was pinned on g5. You mean not capturing with the king. Okay, good point. So, no, 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 this is not what I want. So this, rook d5, king h5, f4, this, and rook a5. Exactly, yes. But it still fails. And it actually fails because of the same reason. So here you can continue with this move. I don't know, rook here, h5, then king g7, and the pawn is promoted successfully. Maybe f5 first. Fine, king goes that way. Actually, here f4 works. No, this time f4 works. You can stop it with this move, right? So, and nothing can stop the h pawn because the enemy king is too far. So rook a4, but h5, and it looks okay. Actually, just this move is okay to take this pawn. The problem of black's position is that their king is too far. Fine, f4, g takes f4, rook d5, and rook a4. So they had to play king b5, attacking our rook. Where should we move our rook? Oh, wow. It seems that the number of viewers on YouTube increased to our maximum today. Perfect, guys. I'm happy that you enjoy our workshops. So for those of you who joined us recently, we are talking about rook and games, how to win rook and games when we have 3 versus 3 on one side of the board and the passed pawn on the other side of the board. This is the most classical game between Alexander Alekhine and José Raúl Capablanca, where white first moved their king to the king side, and then decided to the queen side, and then decided to go to the king side to invade the enemy camp and attack the enemy weaknesses. So rook e4, exactly rook e4, it makes the a5 pawn poisoned and threatens an exchange. Oh, well, this is completely losing for black. That's why king a6 back. How should we win this time? We should take this pawn and make another passed pawn. So king h6. Rook e5 is coming. So let's suggest a move. What kind of move it can be? Well, no, rook a5 seems to be the most logical move, but if f6, it's king g6. And f6, or even both pawns are, I think f6 is lost. So rook a5 here means the king takes there and the f pawn is promoted because this king is still, can be still cut off. So moving the king, well, possible, but I don't think it works. How can we continue here? Well, rook e5, they take there, we take there. Then we need to move the pawn. No, actually, it's a mistake. We should take with the king, of course, to be able to successfully advance the pawn. This is 100% winning position. f6, rook d5, then. So, no, not rook d5. We can play that move, and after king a6, king rook h1, and this is a winning plan because this king is too far. So we simply promote the pawn with our rook behind it. They cannot do anything to stop it. f5, king g6, rook g4. Well, rook g4, king f5. And now they have to locate their rook behind the pawn, but we have the king. Fine. So rook takes a5. Rook e5 anyway. They attack. If they play this move, then rook f5. So it doesn't really allow them to save this pawn. The rook exchange also leads to a game over because of the enemy king, which is too far. And then king h5. This king is too far, and that's the main reason why the game was lost. They played a few more moves, but then So once black realized that their king is cut off, Capablanca resigned. Well, it's impossible. If, for example, he was with the king on g8, and well, it would be still losing, but still possible to fight for a draw. This is the position with no chances. Okay, fine. So let's do a quick summary of this game. What we should try to do: locate the rook behind the pawn, bring the king to that side where we have a passed pawn. If they do not allow us to invade the enemy queen side to support the pawn, for example, by shouldering our king with their king, then let's focus on the king side play and move our king to that side and try to take advantage of the enemy weaknesses there. Almost always there is a chance to play like that. Okay, let's continue with our second example. So this time this rook is behind the pass pawn. So what's your opinion? Is it a win or a draw? Erosh thinks it's a draw. Who else? So here, here the plan is still the same. We should bring the king to that a pawn and let our rook to move. Well, it's a draw. It's a draw if only black plays properly, but it's very hard to find the only moves. That's why such an endgame is playable. And if you're white, you should definitely play for a win, even if your rook is located in front of the pawn. I mean, on the way to the queen in square. Well, what you should do, you should free your rook. How? Don't move your pawn to a7 and have the rook on a8. This is usually a mistake. Why? Let me just show you what happens. King g7, rook a8, let's say this, this. So let's say your king goes that way. So the rook has to stay on the a file. If it captures, then rook moves to b8 and a8 is the next move. Okay, let's say the king finally reaches this position. But then black may start checking from behind and there is no place to escape from these checks. So, and once the king comes closer, it's possible to bring the rook back and stop the pawn. So that's why having the pawn on a6 is more beneficial, because there is a7 square which covers you from checks. Then you can, for example, play something like that, king b7, and advance the pawn with the help of your rook. So remember to not advance the pawn to a7 in such situations. You may advance it only in case if it provides you some concrete winning idea that you know works. For example, the enemy king is in the open space and it's not covered. So after a7, you're going to deliver a check. Let's say the king is on a5 and cannot be hidden by his pawns. So you deliver a check and then promote. Then advancing to a7 is good. Fine. What else I want you to remember? Well, even if you cannot win immediately, you should repeat the position, provoking your opponent to make a mistake. Well, what did happen in the game? Well, king f3, king g7, rook a5, h6, so g3. Well, they are preparing for a better pawn location. Rook a2, rook a8. So white doesn't rush with their a pawn movement. Rook a1, rook a7, rook a2. They just trying to figure out what their winning plan here can be. To be honest, there is no winning plan, and what they can do is just to build this. And all these rook moves were completely useless. They were just played to confuse his opponent. H5. So both players located their pawns ideally. Well, probably they were familiar with this structure. Well, so if the rook is forever kept on the a7, wouldn't black king be stuck to the f pawn? Well, but he can stay on e6. And what do you mean? So they can sacrifice this pawn, you take this, and then it's 2 versus 3 on the flank, which is a draw. So 2 versus 3 is usually a draw. Now, let me illustrate this idea. So let's say this king e6. So then maybe what? King e4. So let's say then king goes to d6, rook captures, rook takes a3, and it seems to be a draw. Ah, well, rook f6 wins. Okay, maybe a wrong rook move. Well, okay, so let's say this, and then king goes, let's say, to king g2, let's say. King g2, king e5. So rook f7. Well, this is 100% a draw. So there is no way to win. The king is too close to the place of action. So you can play this. No, king f6. Finally, 2 will be exchanged. He won't play king g2, but I cannot suggest a better move. And I also cannot find what will stimulate black king to move away from e6. Only the king activity. So maybe king d4. Okay, let me show it once again. So let's say here, this, okay, check. King goes to d4. I move the rook back. I don't know what to play. Maybe c4. Okay, then king d6. So rook f7. This, it's still a, you mean there is, okay, then king e5. So this and this is still a draw. Yeah, king d6 is a mistake because after rook f7, there is rook f6. Okay, fine. So rook a2, rook a5, rook a1, and no, nothing seriously happens here for many, many moves. King finally went to f4, this move. Now f3, rook a1. So he improved his king's position a little, and now he starts advancing pawn, a4. So because this is the main plan, advancing it to a6, bringing the king, and then trying to promote. King f6, rook a6 check, king g7, rook a7, king f6 again. So they repeat the position, king stays there. Rook a3 attacking these pawns, and this move. And this is where black plays a logical move by the first glance, which finally results in a mistake. What do you think they should play in this position? King f6, yeah, king f6, maybe f6 also. Let's say f6, then what? King d5 this time means sacrifice there, and well, then let's say a6, rook g3, a7. No, a7 is a mistake. So rook a7 maybe. Yeah, rook a7. King goes that way. Then rook f7. So rook a3, rook f6. But it's still a draw. Maybe it's also possible to play g5. And after this move, king g7, so pawn takes, rook takes, and this is 100% a draw. Why? Because rook a5. It seems that maybe this move. So the pawn is lost. There is no way to save it. If you, let's say, do this strategy, you lose it. So f6, or king e6 was or king f6 was okay, but in the game it was played rook a4. Looks like a natural check, but this rook is no longer protecting f3, and this is where you can have your winning chances. Why? Because your king goes to the queen side, but they have to spend tempi capturing these pawns. So king d5, rook a3. He wants to take these pawns. He will take them. So advancing them, well, can be played, but doesn't really lead to anything, to any progress. Instead, it should take more tempi for your opponent to capture these pawns. So a6, rook f3, rook b8. We should always try to find a way of how to free our rook and defend the pawn, if not possible from behind, then at least from the side. Rook a3 back, because if he takes there, then it's a a7. So now he has to sacrifice his rook, and this is completely winning position. If the king was on e8, not the rook, but the king was on e8, I would doubt whether it's winning or not, and I would have to calculate. But when the king is closer to the place of action, and the rook can use just one tempo to go to that place of action, it's completely winning, and it's possible to stop enemy passed pawns. So that's why rook goes back to a3, rook b6. So now it's materially equal, but the pawn is far advanced, and we were able to relocate the rook. They played this move, capturing another pawn, king c6, rook a3, and king b7. Now this pawn can be protected, can be promoted by with the help of this king only. What's your opinion? How black should continue here? f5. Well, f5. Okay, so let it be f5. f5, a7. So you have to take it. Otherwise, I play rook a6, and then the pawn will be promoted to a queen. So rook a7, king a7. Now the king is cut off. How to progress? Moving the f pawn means to blunder it. So f3, rook goes that way. Moving the king, and then what? How do you progress? Moving the king to h6, fine. But how do you progress? I can just bring my king closer. This, for example. Neither f4 nor g5 work. So f5 definitely not. So it can be either f6 or g5. Let's say it's f6. Well, f6, a7. They have to take. King takes. Now what? g5 seems to be the most logical continuation. g5. Should we take or not? What do you think? If we take, on the one hand, we cut the enemy king off. They will play g4. So, well, we definitely know that they cannot take. So, because if they take, it ruins their pawn structure at all, and all pawns becomes weak. But they will play g4 then. So, rook b5. g4 is a blunder. Well, king, let's say g6 to protect. King b6. Now g4. King c6. So j3 is a blunder. We attack and then check and win the pawn. So f5, king d5. And then with our king, we are able to stop these pawns. Again, this is a mistake. We do a king move. And if they play g2, we can just simply stop it. I think we can even stop it with this try. So king g7, let's say, and now that way, and we capture both pawns. Why not g takes h4? Okay, why not g takes h4? Let's talk about it. Maybe they can actually no, right now we take there. So, well, maybe you still want to look at this. So king g5, rook goes that way to attack from behind. And now our king is quite close. Well, f3 this, f2, and finally we do that. That's why they have to support it with the king. But if they support it with the king, they spend too many tempi. So the king can be chased away and f3 is lost. So that's why rook b5, king g6, we move the king and then they take. It makes more sense. King c5, well, king g5, king d4, and it's much easier to stop. So when you have to play with your king and rook versus the enemy passed pawn, one pawn or several pawns, the key idea is to bring the king because the king can stop several passed pawns simultaneously if they are located quite close to each other. So king g4, king e3, f5 here, h3. There will be checks from behind. So this means king g2. Anything else means check from there. So king h4. Now it's over. I can just play any move. Well, let me play this. This. King h4, rook h2. So g5 was played in the game, but even this was not enough. H takes and h4, so hoping to create a pass pawn. a7, h3. But, well, this move, as I said, it was a good attempt, but here they could play this. This is what they were relying on. So if a8, it means that h1 is promoted with a check and the queen can be captured and black wins. If you take there first, then it's a check and a perpetual check. So king b8, and this is a perpetual check. And black draws the game. So that's why a8, because then you have time to use your rook to stop the pawn. So rook h6. f6, the last chance, because if you take, you lose a rook. If you take with a rook, you let them to promote. So rook h2, f takes g5, and now a lot depends on how quick this king can join the king side and stop the pawn. Which move would you suggest for white in this position? There is only one winning move. All other moves lead to a draw. So king b7. Well, you probably should focus on your king moves because, well, if your king is able to reach at least e4 in time, then you definitely can stop the pawn. But you also should predict the enemy action. What do we expect him? Just to advance the pawn? No. Once he does this, it's rook h4 and you win this pawn. So they will help to promote this pawn with their king. How? With king f6, king e5, king f4, and so on. And maybe actually, instead of doing just f5, f4, and so on, they will play e5 and shoulder our king. And that's why instead of moving our king first, we should prevent it. We should play rook f2. That is the key. Now, let me illustrate it. So king b7, king f6, king here, king there, king c5, g4. So rook attacks this. And then the rook has to be sacrificed sooner or later. So rook f2, and the rook f2 only allows the enemy king to go through that side, and we can bring our king quicker. So g3, don't locate your rook in front of the pawn, instead locate behind. King g4 because g2 loses, so king e4, and that's it. Because what they can do to progress? Play g2, play king h3. Yes, they can, but king h3, for example, king f3. And now we are threatening with checkmate, so they cannot even promote. If they play this move, we can check, chase the king away, and win a pawn. If what? If let's say they play g2, it's basically the same. Check, king h3, king f3, and the pawn is double attacked. So we win it at the very next move anyway. Okay, so this position was originally drawing, but just one simple mistake, and it can change the evaluation of the position at all. So here still you should advance this pawn. First, make sure that you locate your pawns on the king side properly, then advance this pawn, but only to a6, not to a7, to be able to hide your king on a7 in case if you need to avoid checks from behind. Second, try to liberate your rook. Try to move it to a different position from which it can still defend the pawn if it is required. And then just calculate how much time, how many tempi you need to bring the king to the place of action. Fine, so let's continue. Let's continue with our next example. So Boris Spassky was playing. It's the B pawn. And so what's your evaluation of this position? Is it a draw or a win? I mean, a win for white or a draw? Yes, then so your judgment is absolutely correct. It is a draw because black can get his rook behind the pawn. However, just having the rook there is just a half of the success. You should also play properly then. So h5, locating their pawns. This check can be played at any moment. King f1, rook d2. King e1 can be played, but this cannot because f2 and g2 are lost. That's why here white starts with h4 and then g3. So they now build the most solid constructions with their pawns. Rook c2.
Victor, can I say a quick question here? I was surprised the first move wasn't rook d1 check, forcing white's king to h2 further away from the passed pawn. Rather than the h5 move, yeah, rook d1 check. Then the king has to go away from the passed pawn, and now you can either play h5 or swing behind that pawn.
Okay. Yeah, you can, and it's still a draw. There is no rush with this maneuver. You can always do it later.
Okay.
But if you see that later you are unlikely to have such an option, do it right away. So g3, rook c2, king g2. So you see the rook is always attacking, and probably with such a rook activity, black wanted white to push the pawn. So he wanted to do something like that. And then the rook on b2 is located much better than the rook on b1. Why so? Because it's cutting the king off. So g3, rook c2, king g2, rook d2, king f3, rook c2, rook b6. So it's still a draw. But having the rook there is passive. And because of this move, black loses the game. What they should do instead? Instead of doing such a strategy. Instead, they'd better play this move. Why such strategy? For example, king e3, or maybe, well, rook b5, then king h6, and then g5 is played, and it simplifies the position a lot. f6, maybe king e3, but still g5 is playable, and this simplification will favor black. So king d3 cannot be played. Advancing the f pawn first means rook g2, for example. So this pawn is too far from the queen in square. That's why black may allow himself to spend several tempi on capturing the king side and then going back to b2 to stop the enemy b pawn. Fine. So f6 g5 was fine, but they played rook d2. And with such a passive strategy, they cannot actually draw the game anymore. So b4. Rook b2, logical, but the king is already on e3. If it was on f1, it was better. b5, king f8, rook b7. So this king is cut off. King goes back to g7, but already king d4, sacrificing this pawn. Well, when you play such a move, you should well calculate what happens then. What happens when they take and how far your king is when they have to sacrifice their rook for the b pawn. So don't play this move just because you watched such a workshop and I illustrated that this is a winning plan. Yes, it is a winning plan, but where your pawn should be, on b5 or maybe on b6 first, where your rook should be, on b8 or on b7, all these things should be well calculated. Now rook goes that way. The rook will be here to stop the attack of the g3 pawn. So for example, rook e3 with a tempo, while the king will let the b pawn promote it. And having the rook on the e file also stops the enemy king from moving to the queen side. So rook b2 was played, king c4, king f6, rook e3, defending here. Well, why not king c5, which looks more logical because of this? Now the g3 pawn is lost. So king c4 stops this. If they played something else like rook a2, then we would continue with that move, threatening with rook b3. So they would still have to play this. Rook a3, king f5, rook b3 offering a trade, because with the outside pass pawn, we definitely win. Even if the king is in the square of the pawn, we still win. How? Like that. King c5 is shouldering, so king d6 is a must. King d4, and we simply go to that side of the board. For example, f6. What would you continue here? There should be a square to invade, so we cannot give up the pawn and at the same time not get a square to invade. Actually, I think you are mistaken, because if so, then how do we invade? If we play king f4, then they just take. Well, this, you probably mean this strategy, but then they play g5. Or actually, king c7. What is better? That doesn't matter, I think. This and then g5. So takes means h4 as the next move, and this is a draw. If this, then take. Well, taking is a must, but then the king is close. At least f7 was required to draw the game. So no, you should play accurately. King c4. Why so? If this move, you play that way. So that's why they either push the pawn or if they push this pawn, And then after the king gets distracted to that pawn, we can invade and capture all at least 2 pawns. If they play g5, so f6, king c4, e5, then of course don't take, but move your king there. How does it work? So now it's much easier to invade the enemy camp because you have the f5 square. They may take, and then you win. How? Well, f5, b6. King goes there, king f5, king b6, king f5, this. Oh, it's still a draw. Wait a sec. So my mistake. Okay, so actually, yeah, looks like you cannot get to the king side in time. That's why I suggest a different strategy, like that. King c7, king a6, king b8, and then you do this. And now you're closer to the enemy king side, and they have to do something to stop it. Because if they decide, for example, to continue with f6 and g5, then you play king a7 and nothing can stop your b pawn from promotion. So they have to occupy this b8 square instead. And then king b6. So f6 now, this. g5, this. So this, king b7, king e6. They take here, you take king b6, king f6, king b5, king g6. And now they are too far. You can simply shoulder them with king g7 and successfully promote your pawn. Like that. Fine. So that's why exchanging of the rooks is not possible. King goes to d5, b6, rook c8, b7, rook goes. Well, this is the worst position for the rook because just having the king there means the rook is lost. But it's too early to play king c6 move. Why so? If we play king to c6 move, we may let them have some progress. Actually, I still think it's winning. Rook b7, king b7, then f4, take. Well, it's still a winning position, actually. But I really like the strategy that white chose. In this position, white played king e5 move. There is no rush. This king is stalemated. And if the king goes to h3, then we can go after the pawns first, and then only think about how we promote the b. Can they stop it? Only with f5 move. But f5 means that the king goes there. Now f4 is a must. We take. If they take that pawn, we can chase them away, protect our pawn on h4, and take the one on g6. Actually, is it required? No, we can take on g6 right away. And after king g4, then we can do so. So king moves, we take on h5. Now we have 2 passed pawns. It's an easy win. The king is cut off, and also the rook is passive. So king h4, but king g6, king g4, and just f5. This is a completely winning position. So with 2 pawns, we definitely win. h4, f6, h3, f7, h2. How to play? So who can tell me how should we continue in this position? Rook b1. Yes, rook b1. Rook b1. And then we threaten with king g7 and promotion. They can take on b7 here. And then we take on b7. They play h1. And if we play f8, they take our rook. And this is a draw. That's why intermediate check. The king moves. And then we promote and protect our rook. Now doing checks don't make much sense. So there will be a cross check soon. So this king goes that way, and well, queen g3, but queen g7. No more checks. This is how the game ended. So what you should remember, again, look at this position. So we built a solid pawn structure here, and then decided to move the king, sacrificing our pawn on f2, with the idea to activate our rook, be able to protect other pawns on the king side, and cut the enemy king, and of course, let the king to help to promote the b pawn. So very often, in order to promote, you have to free your rook. Fine. Another example in a similar situation. So again, right now it is a draw. Well, this is a plan. They play f6. No, nothing seriously happened. They play b5. So all exchanges favor black. b5, g takes h4, g takes h4. If they play this move, then b6. And capturing the pawn on h4 is not enough, because after b7, we simply have a check on h8. We can either play rook c8, or we can there's rook c8 or rook h8 with a check. So for example, king g7, then rook c8, and we promote. If they play rook b4, then rook h8 with a check, and then we promote, protecting both pieces. That's why king g6. b6, king f5. And we do not play b7. It's likely to be a draw. Then we play king d4. Well, with rook d4, we let them capturing on f2. What do you think? Is it a good idea to take the pawn on f2 or not? So what comes to your mind? If rook f2, king c3, and the rook cannot get behind the b pawn, thinking this move is a little passive. Why it's not possible to stay behind? I think it is. So you can check. You can check there, and then locate your rook behind. How? Well, for example, this move, rook c. Well, I think you can even take the other pawn and then locate behind. But at least this, and it's possible to locate behind. If this move, then this, and we still can locate the rook behind the pawn. So no. Rook f2 is a mistake because of the other reason. What is this reason? Well, you learned already several examples. What do we have to do in such a case when the enemy rook goes away? Who remembers? Once the enemy rook goes away, it no longer attacks the passed pawn. Well, yeah, king c5 definitely yes, but first liberate your rook. And now you threaten with this. Check and rook b5, and then the pawn is promoted. So they have to play rook b2 right away. Then king c5. They check, king d4 back. Well, it actually doesn't make much sense. You can play a different move too. So king d6 was the best move, actually. So here, for example, this, king d6, and you're winning. Because you can get your king there and advance your pawn further. Move the rook somewhere, bring the king to e8, and promote. So, for example, rook b2, king c6, rook c2, king b5. Well, why I play like that? Because if in case of rook a2, I want to gain a tempo. Now I'm attacking the rook. So if rook goes that way, king c7, and then I try to promote. But let's say king a6, king g4, b7, king h4, b8, and this is a winning position. So I want to attract the king to the pawn to be able to bring the king as soon as possible. So if they just try to advance the pawn, it doesn't work. I can always chase the king away and play king f2. Or for example, this move. King f2, the f pawn can move and I can deliver a checkmate. No, if they go to that side, I can still play like that. Now h1 becomes a blunder. Wait. Maybe actually h1 equals knight. But it's still a blunder. So because the knight on the edge is trapped. So that's why the f pawn. But f pawn king comes closer. This, and both pawns are stopped. So this, how to play? Just let's play like that. King h2, this. Now the king moves, I can capture with checkmate. If h pawn, just another tempo loss. f2, one more. And finally, the king has to stop protecting these pawns. Fine, so that was a winning plan. Instead, in the game, white made a mistake. White played rook a5. He was so attracted to this check. I mean, so, well, now king goes to e6. The king comes closer. King c5. And just having the king on d7 would allow him to draw the game with f5 here. Because check here, the king is able to block the pawn. So not playing like that led to a loss. So rook c2 was played. By the first glance, it looks logical, right? So we check, we forced him to go to b5, but it's already a mistake because the king is hidden it's protected by the rook. So, and after king c6, just rook a1. Why rook a1 first? Because if you start playing b7, they will just attack. Oh, let me show you. Well, I can show you actually a little later. For example, I can show you what happens in case of rook h5, rook a2, rook a5 back, and then they play rook b2, capturing this pawn. What do you think? After b7, should they capture right away or not? Should black capture or not? Or which move do they have to play? Yes, thanks, John. It should be rook b6 with a check, forcing the king to go to a7, and then you can capture with a check. Because if you capture immediately, it's rook c5. King takes. Well, it still should be a draw because the king is inside the square of the pawn. So rook a1 was played, rook c4, and then b7. Well, king c7 means this. Rook b4 means there is a check. Something, yeah, it was a similar play in the game. King moves away and simply rook c8. Oh, actually b8 wins too. In the game, it was b7, rook b4, rook c1. Even they decided to keep the king on a6 because it's closer to the place of action. King d7, rook c8, and then the pawn is promoted. And the f pawn is too far, and the king is too far. And we have one more pawn that exists. So that's this is how he lost the game. So with the b pawn, you see black has more chances to draw the game because their king is closer to that pawn. And we should always eliminate this opportunity. Or at least let them occupy this, but get some benefits on the other side of the board. Okay, so no, this is not the position we are going to talk about at this webinar. We have this last one. The game between Nikola Padevsky and Anatoly Karpov, where Karpov actually lost. And before we continue, I would like to remind you that if you enjoy my webinars and if you would like to support them, you can donate using PayPal. This is the link, for example. It works easily. I mean, it's very simple. You just click the button. Then you can enter the amount that you want to donate. So you enter the amount you want to donate, then you directs you to your PayPal account. So you have to, well, it's PayPal, you have to log in and with your PayPal details, and then it allows you to send money directly to my PayPal account. I would appreciate it. It helps me to prepare better for our events and conduct them for free. Fine. So the link is here. Let's continue with our last example then. Fine. So what do we have here? This is the C pawn, and this time this rook can be located behind the pawn. So this is exactly what white does. They play this move, rook c2. It's definitely correct. This is the key factor which allows us to have winning chances here. And the king goes to d7. So what's your opinion? Is it a win or is it a draw? Because it's not the A pawn, it's the C pawn. So it's located quite close to the king side. Okay, Michael thinks it's a draw. Well, actually, it's a win. It's still a win. Why? Because the pawn, I think, is already far advanced. If it was on c4, then if the pawn was on c4, then maybe black could have drawing chances, more drawing chances. But what's going on here? So such a position allows white to activate their king a lot. So this move, and in this position, we can get to d5 with our king. And it means that this rook can get some freedom. Could they play anything else to stop it? Well, I don't know. I don't think that this check is a good check. You see, our rook is not able only to support from behind, but it's able to stop, protect the pawn on h2. They could try king a6. That's right. But how king a6 works if this time we have a side maneuver? For example, king d4, now king d7 back. Now still rook a2 can be played. And we can still do the same strategy. But if not, if the king is somewhere on that side, then king c4, king b5. Actually, by protecting this pawn with our king, we let our rook to deliver checks, attack enemy pawns, or do some other helpful tasks. So rook f6. Now we have a chance to move the rook. this time, all this strategy is based on a tactical strike. I wouldn't play such a move if only I saw that king c6 is playable in this position. But in this exact position, it is a blunder. There is a rook behind and there is a skewer. So that's why they don't have such a move. Well, maybe they can attack with the rook once again, but this time I already used the king. Well, rook f5. So the rook attacks, the king is behind. But rook a7, check. King goes, well, if the king goes to c6, then it's this. And it's a kind of Zugzwang. Why is it a Zugzwang? Because if they play rook f6, we have a check, a skewer. If they play a pawn move, they are likely to get a Zugzwang soon. Yeah, well, because we have moves with our pieces. For example, it can be h4 or h3. Then they would have to move the king. Well, I actually would play king d4 in this position. Why so? To be able to protect and check. Okay, so king c6 doesn't really help. They can be in the Zugzwang soon. That's why they play king e8. But king e8 seems like a very bad move. Well, let's talk about this move a little more. So rook a5. Maybe there is still a chance to not lose. So let's say king c7. h4. For example, h4. King c6. Rook a7. What's the point of rook a7? If they take with a rook, we take there. And this. This. And then they lose this pawn. For example, rook d5 is a blunder. If rook d5, oh yeah, we can exchange the rooks. And then there is a win. So why they cannot keep their rook on d5? For example, king c6. Okay, so h4, no, here. So rook d5, let's say. Then rook a6 check. And after king c5, rook a5. And if king b7, then we definitely win. Oh, there is also rook b6 intermediate move. No, they cannot. So once we win this, we can win the one on g6. And without two pawns, it's definitely a loss. What? So rook a7, king c6, rook a5, f6, h4. Well, and this is a this is a Zugzwang. What they can do. So g5 fails. There is a rook hanging. Rook d5 fails. There is a rook a6 check. They can just move the king, or they can capture on c5. If they capture on c5, it's an easy win. We can do what? We can exchange. Yes, I think we can. Can you play h3 and g4 and win the rook? Yeah, well, we will discuss it. So here, f5. If they take, they lose. If they play g5, take, take, king e5. h4, f6, h3, f7, h2, f8, check. So they have to play this move. f6, king d7, f7, they are in time. So king e6 again. No. No, this is a draw. Wait, no, it's not. King e6, h4. This. If they take and then they promote, there is queen e8 at the very end of the line, and we win on h1. So they have to advance like that. Then I would love to exchange the queens. Okay, then maybe this, and this. And with the f pawn and the king being too far, it should be winning, but it's a bit hard. Okay, well, maybe instead of that, okay, we can just play like that. And then we promote with a check. And if they try to stop, it doesn't. It doesn't work. Fine. So yeah, rook c5 doesn't work. What they play instead? King c7. So f6, h4, and let's say king c7. How do we win this time? Can we play this move? Rook a6? Or maybe it's better to, well, let's do this move, because if rook c5 this time, we take on f6 and we also win the pawn on g6. Or they have to play rook c6 and exchange. Yeah, so we are 2 pawns up then. Rook c7, rook a6, rook c5, rook f6. Okay, so rook a6. They have to play a different move. But again, it seems that they ran out of moves. Well, can it be king d7? What's your winning strategy if such a move is played? Remember, you are pawn up. John, I will answer your question regarding h3 and g4 a little later. I don't think it works, actually, but we will talk about it. So what is the winning plan here? So let's say king is on d7. Rook a7, rook g7. Interesting. Interesting, but there is no guarantee that you win the pawns. Probably it's still winning. Yes, there is rook d6 and rook d5. So rook d6, king moves, rook d5, and then the rooks are exchanged. And with the rook are exchanged, it's completely winning for white. Maybe here you may say, well, Victor, what's the purpose of moving to d7 where you can be checked? Why not to move there? Well, yes, but it's basically the same strategy. And then g6 is lost, or the rooks are exchanged. So this is a winning plan. Rook a7, king c6, and rook g7 looks very interesting. And it still seems to be a win. Yes, I agree. So it was winning too. So there are several ways to win. Can you instead play h3, g4? So rook a5, let's say. Well, maybe they play f6 and you play h3. The rook trapped. Well, yeah, it still works. But it works only because it is a Zugzwang. So they have to move the king, and then you can play g4. And yes, this traps the rook. But if, for example, well, so this is still a win. G6 is low. Oh, well, g5 this time can be played. So it's a little different. But after g5, yeah, it's not clear. It still should be winning, but f takes g5, let's say rook takes king f4. And after the rook moves, you can play rook f5 and win that pawn, or exchange the rooks, which again allows you to win. Right. So this is how you win here. Yeah, h3, g4 would work too. So there are a lot of ways. In the game, it was king e8 played because probably they just didn't like king c6. But king e8 loses even faster. Rook a5, king goes that way. King d4, protecting it. Well, h4 to undermine. Maybe white would better play h4 himself. Rook a8, king c7, rook a7, king c6. And it's basically the same situation. Taking with the king is a disaster. Taking on g3 and then, for example, continuing with this move could make a lot of sense, but after rook g7, they lose this and they lose that. Now it's pinned. There can be a check, but what then? So capturing right away is a mistake too, right? Because then rook f6. And g5 this time fails because of that. Because of that, king d7 and rook. No, because of that move. So why? Rook c4 check, for example, king d3, the rook is hanging. And once the rook goes to the safe place, rook g5, white is 2 pawns up. So rook c5 was finally played here. Rook f7, threatening with this here to attack the most weak pawn, but rook f6. Rook takes g6. It looks like they win a pawn, and now the ratio is +1 for white, but these pawns are connected. And because of that, it's possible to win. Let me show you how it works. So this would lead to a draw because the king would go that way and would stop the pawn. But after g4, h3, rook h6, rook h1, king goes here. So what the white's plan is, he has 2 pawns. That's why he will use 1 pawn to show to be able to defend his king from checks from behind. So h2, g5, king e7, g6. He goes that way, but we can just capture the pawn. Rook h7, this, and then capture the pawn to shoulder the king. But let's say he did something like king f8. King f8, king f6, and this is where he could have checks from behind. But because of the pawn, he doesn't, and then he gets checkmate. Or g7 and then rook h8. So that's why this pawn provides us with a winning position. So rook h2, rook a5, and soon, well, in this position, actually, Karpov resigned. Well, it's an easy win. So this, and doing this check allows us to hide there. We are threatening with checkmate. They have to go that way, but then it's just rook b7 and rook h7, rook h8. So they have to keep their rook on the back rank to not blunder back rank mate. But after rook h7, it's over. So this is a threat. So moving the king there means we can check and still play this move. So actually, most likely, if you have a chance to locate your rook from behind, you are winning. However, a lot depends on the pawn structure on the other side of the board, as well as your king's position. So at least from this workshop, you can remember that locating rooks from behind, either for you or for your opponent, is beneficial. Your strategy is to bring the king and free your rook, if you have such a chance, and try to promote the pawn with the help of your king, not the rook. If it's not possible, then try to invade the other side of the board with your king. Always having in mind what happens in case if they take your pawn, whether this exchange of the rooks will lead to a winning pawn endgame or not. Because for example, if here we had the king on d5, I would say this is a draw. If there was the same thing with the king, with the pawn on a5, it would be a winning position, because the king from a5 is too far from the king side. On d5, it's quite close. So that's actually the biggest difference between having the a, b, and c pawns. Okay, fine. So we are done for today. I hope you learned a lot and now you improve. Well, now you can play these end games better. What else? On the 4th of April, which is Friday, I'm going to start a new course of group lessons. Uh, the topic will be how to attack and defend in chess. I'm working on a landing page for this course. I cannot show it now, it's not ready yet, but it will be ready next week. And on the next webinar, I will present it. Fine. So, do you have any questions? Again, I would be happy to see everyone on Tuesday when I play Title Tuesday on chess.com. There will be a stream on Twitch, and there will be a Rapid Arena. I think is either Queen's Gambit or Rui Lopez on Thursday. Not sure what time, but I'll try to do later if it's possible for me, because this time it wasn't. That's why I started the arena tournament earlier. So maybe this Thursday I'm gonna have more time. Okay, again, if you have any questions or if you have any suggestions, you can always message me at tricksofchess@gmail.com. As well as if you are looking for individual classes, you can also message me there. I would appreciate your donation and hope to see everyone at least next Sunday, if not earlier. Thank you for attending this event. And, well, if you want, you can share it with your friends, chess players. Tomorrow, I'm going to send you the recording of this event. Fine. So thank you for joining and see everyone soon. Bye-bye.